As was his wont when faced with an important life event, one of the first preparations my brother Robert made for his forthcoming wedding was to pay a visit to his friend, the elderly tailor Mr. King, in the hope of a fitting for his wedding suit. This aged and dank establishment, which was at the end of a narrow alley that backed onto a leather tanning works, was a business Robert had frequented for several years, whose owner was familiar with Robert's singular requirements. However, as Bobby related to me with his usual flair when I called on him about another unrelated matter concerning news from Henry, now away serving in the Navy, on this occasion things did not go quite according to plan. For when Robert arrived at the door of the run-down-looking shop front with its peeling paint and broken panes of glass that gave the customer the impression that the business was owned by a person named M. In and ducked to enter, blocking out whatever light came in from the alleyway, it appeared that no one was within, other than a small grey mouse that scuttled away into a corner. "Hello there, Jonathan, are you there, lad?" I holloed, said Robert, as he hovered by the fireplace carefully toasting some tea cakes for our supper. No sign of the old codger, so I hollered again. Then would you ken it, it weren't King that comes out from the back. It were this lanky young fellow with shaggy hair, who I'd never seen before in me life. Dressed in a suit of clothes so dusty and old-fashioned, he looked like he'd robbed some poor soul's grave. "Mr. King's dead," says he, all casual-like. "He dropped stone dead last month. I'm his only relative, so I'm in charge now," says he, rising up all proud-like as though he were the bee's knees or summut. I settled into my seat by the fire and smiled inwardly, knowing that I was in store for one of his rambling but entertaining tales. "Then," he continued, whilst forking a hot tea cake onto a plate and spreading it thickly with butter and honey, "when I explained my business and made him aware that I was a loyal customer of the late lamented old boy, the youngster looked me up and down, then went to fetch Mr. King's old ledger with all its measurements. "Name," says he, with a smarmy look on his daft face. "Mr. Robert F. Lindsay," says I. Then the fool spends an age flicking through that dusty tome until he finds my previous orders. Then he looks me up and down again and says, "It looks to me as if you've been living very well indeed since your last fitting. I better measure you. Off with your coat and waistcoat, chest and stomach out," he says. So there I am, stripped to my shirt sleeve, arms sticking out like a scarecrow and letting everything hang out, so to speak, feeling a right twerp. Then over he comes with the tape measure, which binds tighter about my chest so I can hardly breathe, when he writes some numbers in the ledger. Scribble, scribble. Then the cheeky git, he takes the tape and tries to bind it around my belly. "I'm sorry, sir," says the cheeky devil with a smile on his cocky face. "This tape doesn't appear to be long enough for a gentleman of your substantial figure. I shall have to have a look below to see if I can find a longer one, or perhaps if I can bind two together it may just go about you." Can you imagine the impertinence of the lad? I should have boxed him around the ears for that remark. But instead I gave him a few choice Anglo-Saxon parting words and told him that in future I'll be taking my business, and my substantial figure for that matter, elsewhere, concluded Robert, as he began to warm a second round of tea cakes. "Of your many admirable qualities, my dear brother, self-awareness is not one," I thought, as I travelled the short distance home in the brougham that he'd hailed for me. If Robert had been affronted by this experience at the tailor, in his typical fashion, the thing was soon as water off a duck's back. In no time at all, he eagerly began to devise the menu for what he hoped may be a combined wedding and Christmas feast, fit for what he viewed as his last big hurrah. "So no po-faced relations conversing over limp cucumber sandwiches for me," he said scornfully.